back live again tonight. It is not warmed up here in Columbus, Ohio, since we met with everybody last week. I'll get a full weather report from both of you, but hello and welcome to everyone that is joining us this evening. My name is Melissa. I am the community manager for the Jane Austen Literacy Foundation, and we welcome you to hang out with us on another Wednesday night and just have fun chatting about all things Jane Austen. Mindy, if you would like to introduce yourself this evening and tell us the latest Austen novel maybe that you read, currently reading, getting ready to read for this year.
Okay, well, hi, I'm Mindy Kilgrove-Harris, and I just finished, I talked about it last week, I just finished The Other Bennet Sister, and I really enjoyed it. I'm currently reading First Impressions because that's part of our book club this week, and so I started that today and made some really good headway. It's not what I was anticipating at all, so I am into it and looking forward to steamrolling. I mean, I'm sure I'll be done by the weekend.
I love hearing that. I've actually got a few messages from people that are like, oh my goodness, I haven't been able to put it down. I'm hooked. I'm going to be done by this weekend. So it's really great when everyone's reading it quickly. At least, even if you didn't love it, if you hated it, whatever, it means it's getting you into the mood to keep going on it. So that's exciting. Marigold, welcome again tonight. Rocking a new hairdo. We love it. Go ahead and introduce yourself and what Austen you're reading.
I'm Marigold Webb, and I am reading First Impressions as well. I have got halfway through now, and I surprisingly am enjoying it, only because, as I told you, I'm not a big fan fiction kind of reader, and I think it was actually really good. I'm really into it, so I'm already halfway through because I'm just like going through. And then the other one is I'm still reading The Persuasion for my other book club, and of course I'm going through it very slowly because I'm picking out all the good marrow.
I love that. Are you still annotating and highlighting as you're going through? And you're
making all my notes. What's that?
I said you're still enjoying the process of annotating?
I am. I think I've enjoyed this because I've read it so many times for like school and then just out of enjoyment that I've just kind of sped through. So this is like a real interesting way of reading things, like reading something that you're already familiar with and then enjoying the process.
Have you done it on your Kindle yet? Not to get sidetracked. I'm just curious if you've done any highlighting on there because it's such a different experience.
I'm really funny because I've been reading it on that because I've enjoyed listening to it at the same time. But then like I'll highlight and then I'm a nerd because I go back in the book and put my tab in so that when I go to my book club, I have the tabs that I can easily find them. So I'm like both digital and books.
Yeah.
Nerds unite. With our tabs, nerds unite because this is what we all do. We love them, right?
Absolutely. I don't know how we dealt without tabs. Like I love the multicolors. I have like every time they mention persuasion in it, I put one color. They've like dissed and I put another color. So I'm like really interested in how many times it comes through the book.
I love it. I tried and my cats ripped the tabs out. It's too high maintenance. So if I do, it's mostly highlighting on my Kindle now. And I love the fact that you can even send it to yourself and email it. So you can kind of compile it like in Google Docs if you want and save your different highlighted features over the year, what you've been reading. So extra nerdiness to do. So welcome. I can see we have a few people already joining us this evening. So if you want to let us know where you are joining us from, it's always fun to see what part of the globe we have viewers joining in. If you're watching this afterwards, feel free as well to let us know where you're at. Marigold, is it freezing for you? Because it's freezing here for me.
It is. It's about 22 degrees, and I have my little heater in the back here. Because my upstairs, we usually heat the downstairs when we're in it, so we don't heat the upstairs as much. So it's a bit chilly up here. So I put my little heater on. I'm doing well.
It was 3 degrees this morning when I took my son to school. It's so cold. So Mindy, what is it like in Florida this week? Give us our weather report so we can feel warm.
Well, it was a chilly 65 today. So.
Oh my goodness. I should turn your camera off just for saying that.
Yeah, but you know what? In the morning, we do start relatively cold. So it ends up it's a lot like an Ohio spring where you start at like 30, 40 degrees. And then by midday, you're at 70. That's what we do for our winters.
Don't try to make us feel like you're not so much warmer than we are. Well, at
No,
least
I'm going to go pack a bag. I'll see ya.
I know Marigold and I are getting cozy and getting lots of reading in because we're freezing and we don't want to go anywhere else. So
I actually want to get that clicker for the Kindle that you don't have to take your hands out. My friend told me about it. I'm like, I didn't understand before, but now I'm like, I get it.
Yes. One of my friends was trying to convince me to get that. And I was like, I feel like that's the ultimate laziness, but my hands are freezing right now, and it does sound like, I don't know, I might have to do it before the winter's over.
She has the holder for the Kindle
Yes.
and then the clicker. I'm like, do you really need? Yeah, I think so.
Oh my goodness, I love it. All right, so tonight we are going to chat a little bit about Austen's bad boys, about the gentleman. Let's kind of compare the two from each book. And Mindy graciously made us these slides that we have this evening, which are so wonderful and really let us kind of look at different adaptations too, and how the different characters are played by different people. And as I was putting the slides together for us to share, I was really struck by the fact that there's definite differences even between the sort of rogues of her book and how bad they are, what personas they take. So I think it's going to be a fun conversation for us to have. So we'll start here and we will work our way through most all of Austen's books. So Mindy, why don't you kick off the conversation for us and lead us through?
Okay, well, because of you, Melissa, I have been all about Lady Susan for the past couple of weeks. It started with a conversation about Love and Friendship, which I'd never seen. And so I watched that. And then I thought, okay, I need to go back and reread Lady Susan, which I did. And then I went back and watched Love and Friendship again. So for me, the relationship there on the first slide where we have Mr. Mainwaring and Reginald de Courcy is very fresh in my mind. And I really feel like this is an example where Austen sets us up with the sweetest sort of man in Reginald de Courcy, who actually falls victim to the Lady Rake, Lady Susan, versus, of course, Mr. Mainwaring, who is just also intoxicated by her very presence, so much so that he leaves his wife, which I think really, it has been so scandalous for that day. Not just that Lady Susan was flirtatious with both of these gentlemen and caught their attention, but that it went so far that he left his wife for her.
Absolutely. And I think it is interesting to see two men falling for the same woman kind of on a different level than we have in any of Austen's other books. I was thinking about, we have Elizabeth Bennet where Mr. Darcy is obviously falling for her. And I think Mr. Wickham in a little bit of a sense is kind of falling for her as well, although not enough to be pursuing her to any extent. But after going back and watching, then reading, and then rewatching, did it really come across in a different light to you to be able to enjoy it?
Well, I know that you especially enjoy the scenes with Sir James Martin because he's such a comedic presence in the movies. But when you're reading the novella, he's really just a secondary, almost tertiary character where he's mostly talked about as opposed to having any real input. And I feel like that's why he's not on the slide, right? Because he also is subject to her Lady Susan's coquettish ways, and but I don't know that he is a bad boy or a hero or anything of that sort because he's just manipulated. Maybe that's the best word for all of the people in Lady Susan.
Yeah, everyone is sort of all spun around Lady Susan and her antics. And I think Reginald is such an interesting kind of gentleman hero-y sort of character because he's so sort of naive in a sense in his character and his story arc versus any of the other gentlemen I think that we see. in Austen's her other books, which might be a maturity thing in the sense of how she was portraying the different men that she was writing about. But they're two of the more fascinating characters for sure in Austen's writing. Marigold, have you read Lady Susan before?
I read it a while ago for school, but I did recently watch it since you guys were talking about it before, and I was like, oh, I gotta watch it again. Because I remember it being funny, but I couldn't remember like who it was. And just some of her lines, at least in the movie, were just so clever. Her behavior is just like, you want to not really like her, but you can't help it because she's just so manipulative and so clever at what she's doing. It's like, oh, so bad.
So I think we collectively agree that the adaptation, although it takes liberties like all do, it got the spirit across of Lady Susan and her devious personality.
Absolutely.
I love it. And then what do you have next for us, Mindy?
Let's see. So we're looking at persuasion, and I was telling Marigold that I was really having some trouble picking which photos to use of our gentlemen and our villains for the for persuasion, because there are quite a few adaptations, and I know you're reading it right now. So we have Captain Wentworth and Mr. Elliot.
This Mr. Elliot makes my skin crawl. Just so,
I do agree.
I don't know. It's just something about his silence and the way that he portrays him gives me the I don't know. it's good to watch, but Mr. Elliot as a whole is just such I don't know what's the right word to call him, just like again, devious, sort of like Lady Susan in a way, type of character that is hard to see him in scenes because you just want him to be gone and nowhere near Anne at all. How is your reading of it going so far, Marigold, and where are you at in the story so far?
I actually don't remember which chapter. It's hard when you're reading two different books. So I forget how far into it I am. But I was going to say the character portrayals of each one, I forget how in depth they are when they talk about the people, and I couldn't believe how many times they talk about Anne and how she was just so plain and old, and so how they say she's wouldn't be anywhere with anyone, no one else is going to want her. So Elliot is well, that's your chance. But he's just so I don't know, sneaky.
Yeah.
I think any of the character, even just reading it gives you that creepy feeling. So it doesn't matter which actor portrays him; they do very well.
Absolutely. And Mr. Elliot, I find him to be really easy to hero. Is just his mannerisms. And what am I saying? Not Mr. Elliot. It's been a long day. Captain Wentworth is easy. I'm what? My brain was malfunctioning there for a second as I'm talking. It's not sounding right. Captain Wentworth, he's so reserved in his manners in a sense, but you can just kind of, I feel even through his quietness, see his character about him.
Absolutely.
And his steadfastness to Anne as well. Mindy, do you have thoughts on Captain Wentworth as a whole?
I think I need to go back and reread Persuasion again. This is why I reread, because I get something new every single time. And in my memory, Mr. Elliot, I feel like everything happens with him so quickly. It's he's not introduced until, halfway through the story, and then it's a very sudden turn of events that we realize what he's really about, And so I feel like maybe some of my impressions of him aren't necessarily what's written, but what I've seen in the adaptations. And that's why I think I do need to go back and reread just so I can get a clearer perspective on his character.
It's so easy for that to happen. Where TVs and movies blur into, because I feel like that's such a vivid picture. It's typically the ones that we enjoy more frequently than reading through the books. So it kind of becomes in the forefront of our mind of the movie adaptations.
That's why I've enjoyed reading it, because I've seen the older version so many times that I feel like I could play it in my head while I'm reading it, and I'm like, oh, that's a little different. But it's funny how you just get so involved in it, because he's actually my favorite character. Like, that's my favorite movie and book for all Jane Austen, and I just find their connections and their reconnection so important.
That's a great point. And Mindy, that's a great point as well, of Mr. Elliot showing up later in the book. So Marigold, when you get to the end of the book, if you could kind of give us an update as to what was your impression, how late does he kind of come into the book? Refresh our memory for us before we get to our reread of Persuasion.
Absolutely.
All right, and next we have... Go ahead, Mindy, and walk us through.
So next we have Mansfield Park, and we've got Edmund, Bertram, and Henry Crawford. And, for me on this one, I know we were sort of looking at the bad boys versus the good guys. And when I read Mansfield Park, I don't necessarily see either of them as particularly as bad boys. I know Henry Crawford is painted as a little bit more of a flirt. But a lot of times I come back to the lines where he's just imploring Fanny to marry him, to love him. He believes she can change him. And I don't always read that as such a bad thing. Sometimes I think he's being genuine.
Interesting. Yeah. And
you don't read it that way then.
No, I can totally see that. I think he's the least roguish of most of Austen's bad boys. I think he's maybe very opportunistic is how I see him a little bit more, but not at a Wickham level or anything where he's out to cause lots of problems for everybody. And Edmund is kind of a difficult character. Like they're both kind of in the middle. Like you don't love, or at least for me, I'm sure there are people that absolutely love Mansfield Park, but neither one of them do I have strong emotions one way or another about their characters. Marigold, has this been a recent read for you or adaptation watches or anything?
It hasn't. I did see this version. I do remember seeing it, but it has been a very long time. This is not one of my favorites, so I don't watch it as much.
Yeah, I think it's probably one of those ones that we could use more rereads to get familiar with it, because I'm sure it does have some merits to it that will come out each time we reread it. So yeah, that might be one for us to do a bit later this year and have some fun coming on and discussing it as we go through it. And
I think that would be fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to welcome Rosa. She's here with us from the community as well. So thank you so much for joining us live, Rosa. It's great to see you. All right, everyone's, well, I say everyone's very generally, but how do you not love Pride and Prejudice? It's way at the top for most people. So Mindy, walk us through, what are we thinking on this one?
Well, we have Mr. Darcy and, of course, Mr. Wickham here, who in many ways I think Austen designed to be foil characters. But as I was kind of readying myself for this discussion tonight, I got to thinking about Mr. Darcy. And in some ways, I think, he turns into the gentleman we want Elizabeth to marry and to love and to cherish. But in the beginning, he's not at all a great guy. And in the beginning, I really don't even think it's a matter of misunderstanding, because sometimes you could argue that, right? But he honestly does offend her.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So I don't know.
Kind of having those moments where he Snickers at the beginning. He's a little grumpy around everybody, and yeah, I think it's just his character before we see his arc really take place over the story. And the one thing that I absolutely love about Mr. Darcy, though, is his willingness to change on his own over time and become a new person, not just because he has to for some reason. And I know we've had some great conversations off camera too about Mr. Darcy. That'll be fun for us to keep exploring as the year goes on. And we have very different ideas of how we see some of the scenes and how we interpret them, and that's a lot of fun to discuss. Marigold, what are your thoughts on Mr. Wickham?
Oh, he's the worst of all characters. I mean, that's my opinion. Just my opinion. But he just, one of those. I wish I could go back and read it for the first time, because I don't remember what my feelings were the first time, because it's just been so long. But I feel like I probably was like, oh, Wickham was wonderful, paying such attention to her. Why is she giving Darcy a chance? You know. But now it's just like, no, he's the worst. Stay away from him. Don't even talk to him. But yeah, of all the villains, I feel like he's my, yeah.
When people talk about those moments of like, what book do you wish you could reread for the first time? I really wish I could not only reread Pride and Prejudice for the first time, but I could read it with the experience of a contemporary of Jane Austen, and like not knowing anything going into this and reading it for the first time would just really be an amazing experience, because it's so immersed in our culture, our pop culture now, so it would be very difficult to kind of not know what a Wickham is going into it. But I do indeed feel like he is the most calculated of all Austen's bad boys, as we call them, and he really, you can see him just kind of plotting out continuously. It's not just one situation that, oops, my bad, I shouldn't have done. Like he keeps having a pattern, more so than any of the other rogues that we see through Austen's books.
I agree. I was going back and forth. Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. You're fine.
I was gonna say I was going back and forth of which one I thought was either Willoughby or him, and I feel like he is the worst just because of that point that he's so calculated, whereas Willoughby feels like a more kind of like just loose and like has no plan, whereas this one is like, this is my plan, this is what I'm doing.
Absolutely. Mindy, what were you gonna say?
Talked a lot about fan fiction, and I really think I should try to find something, or maybe the two of you can recommend, or someone in the community. But I would love to see someone take on Wickham and sort of try to explain his mercenary behavior, because, you know, from the reader's perspective, we do see him with Elizabeth, but then Mary King comes in. So we know that he never really had any intentions with Elizabeth. And, you know, and then of course he ends up with Lydia, which is just kind of amazing in so many ways. Right? I mean, it is such a unique sort of way to take his whole life. So I would love it if, you know, so I could find where an author had kind of seriously gone into Wickham's life and tried to figure out how this all wound up being who he was.
Absolutely. I'm sure there are some out there. So if anybody knows of some Jane Austen fan fiction that delve a bit into Wickham's brain, then please feel free to let us know in the comments so we can check that out. All right. And then we have
Northanger Abbey with Henry Tilney and John Thorpe. For me, I really love the concept of Northanger Abbey, and that it's satirical, and there's so many of those beautiful Gothic elements in it. But the way a lot of people talk about Mansfield Park is sort of how I feel about Northanger Abbey, with all of the mansplaining and the sort of lukewarm relationship between Henry Tilney and Catherine Morland. So as I was prepping this slide, it's so very obvious that John Thorpe is not the man for Catherine. But at the same time, I think there is an argument to be made that Henry Tilney just happens to be at the right place at the right time.
I am dying a little bit over here. So, okay, I've got my Northanger Abbey sweatshirt on. I am the Northanger Abbey fan in the room tonight.
Well, tell us, Melissa, about your opinion with these two gentlemen.
I I can totally see your reasoning. And Thorpe, oh, he's another one of those, like, I just want him to go away. I scream and yell at him when I'm reading or when I'm watching the movies because I just cannot stand him. And I want Catherine to be a little less naive in her dealings. And so I'm yelling at Catherine as well because I'm trying to walk her through this situation. I love Henry Tilney. I totally get the mansplaining, but I just find him like sarcastic and I don't know. I'm gonna defend him. I truly I enjoy him. Maybe it's because he is so different too from Austen's other heroes that I just find him a bit like outside of the box. But his I feel like he's teasing. And there's that line of, is it mansplaining or is it a bit of tongue in cheek? Like, how does it come across? Which I think is one of the most amazing parts that each of our experiences and the life that we're bringing into it is how we read the words on the page, and it's very different for everyone. But I'm going to be a Henry Tilney stan for the rest of my life. I'm sorry, Mindy.
That's all right.
Marigold.
What do you think, Marigold?
I also agree. I do not take it as being spinning. I took it as kind of like the teasing and fun with her, only because she is so naive. So I feel like it was like that like bringing it out, but not making it like you want, so you don't totally dislike her for being so green, I guess. So she learns a lot while she's there, but it is like maybe overwhelming. So I do understand where you could see that, but yeah, John Thorpe, I can't stand him either because so bad.
It might help change your opinion a smidge, Mindy. There's a fantastic, it's called Murder at Northanger Abbey. It's kind of a cozy mystery. Shannon Winslow is the author that wrote it, and it's like set post-marriage for Catherine and Henry, and you can kind of enjoy their relationship, and maybe that will be the book that will redeem Henry Tilney for you.
Maybe. I feel like we could do a whole episode on Henry Tilney because we could,
Absolutely.
we could be for and against. So
Beth says they try to change him in the movie Lost in Austen. Have you guys seen it? You're my movie buffs.
I haven't seen it yet.
I have seen it, but I cannot remember that part.
And I think, Beth, I think you're referring to Mr. Wickham. I think that came up on the last live. So,
okay.
And because I believe that's Darcy that she sees. It's been a very long time since I've seen that movie as well. That would be interesting to try to give Wickham a different spin. I don't know how you justify what he does, but it'd be interesting to see them try.
I agree.
All right. The time goes by so quickly, so we better get to our next one on here. What have we got?
So we have Emma, and that's Mr. Knightley, and Frank Churchill. I was telling the gals earlier, this is the second time I put Johnny Lee Miller on our slides because anytime he appears in one of the adaptations, that's the one I like best.
No bias there.
Not at all. So I'm actually reading Emma right now. I think I mentioned that I'm rereading Emma for one of my Jasna groups, and it's so much fun. But in my head, I always knew that Mr. Knightley was older than Emma, but it wasn't until this time when I was putting all my flags in, right, Marigold, that I guess I digested that he's a full 16 years older than her. So for me, I'm kind of trying to read it with that in mind. And it really changes the way I'm seeing his character and their relationship.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too that they've known each other growing up. So like having a big age gap, if you meet as adults, I feel like is not the same as if you've seen the person since they were a baby and you already have memories at 16 and he's seen her grow up throughout that whole time period. So that's definitely an interesting point. My husband and I have 11-year difference between us. So like I get the age gap thing, but we met when we were adults. So I feel like there's a lot of times like we don't really think about it, but 16 and a baby is very, very interesting age gap. But I'm sure quite common for the time, though.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure that it was very difficult, especially knowing that they were, known each other for so long, but seeing her as a kid, and then he always wants to like direct her or inform her, and so how she just takes all of it and still wants to talk to him.
Absolutely. Do you, seeing it in a different light with the age gap, are you enjoying it more, or is it just different? Any thoughts around it?
Well, for me, again, because I didn't realize the age gap, I wasn't thinking about how John, his brother, is actually younger than him, which puts him closer to her sister Isabella, right? So it's really changing almost the whole interpretation, and pieces and parts of it, like how George handles Mr. Woodhouse with so much aplomb, right? He's an older gentleman. He isn't going to be quite as prickly around Mr. Woodhouse and his sensitivities. He knows how to appease. So I think it really, because I'm reading it, maybe because I'm piggybacking it off of Lady Susan. So, right, like she's the femme fatale who is luring in the younger gentleman. And then we have Mr. Knightley, who is that same kind of age gap, but he is so much more gentle. And when he's course correcting Emma, I don't feel like it comes off the way Henry Tilney does with Catherine Morland. So I'm going to keep, rolling through but sort of paying attention to that age disparity and how it builds their relationship.
I think it's a bit more parental almost in the way that he talks to Emma versus Henry Tilney is still a bit younger himself. So he thinks he has life experience, but does he really have all that much life experience that he's trying to share there? It would be really interesting to know the age difference between Mr. Woodhouse and Mr. Knightley, with it being 16 years. Like they might have a smaller age gap between the two of them than he does with Emma. If we only knew.
Yeah.
All right, our last slide that we have.
So I had to throw Sanditon in there because I'm always talking about how much I loved it. And even just the first 90 pages when Jane Austen wrote them, I love those. But in the most recent adaptation, we have Sidney Parker and Young Stringer, who are the gentlemen in the first season. You both watched that, right? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Okay, but then in the second and third season, right, we get a whole new batch of suitors for Charlotte. So, but for me, I thought this was the best season, so that's why I threw these fellas in here.
And did you think there's a definite difference, like our Darcy Wickham situation, or what did you feel like our level of difference was between Gentleman and Bad Boy?
Well, I think that definitely. I don't really even attribute these characters to Jane Austen. I more give credit to the creator of the series, who would have been Andrew Davies, right? And I think he really leans into making Sidney Parker more of the bad boy, but he is the choice Charlotte makes right up until the end of that season, right? So I think that is very unique. And I would have loved to have, had a peek inside one of Jane's letters or her journal or something to see what her intention was, because, Young Stringer wasn't even in her version.
Yes. So, Marigold, you've seen the movie or the TV series as well. Do you think that they play into Austen's characters, or is this a very loose, just based off the general heroes and rogues we see in Austen?
I had not read the Sanditon pages. Now I'm very interested. I did not realize that is so short, but I feel like the same. Like I was surprised that she would be directing to the bad boy, and then you feel like you would like at the end. Wait, you should have chose Stringer. It would have been a better choice.
I love it.
Yeah,
and
it was
our last one for the evening.
Go ahead.
Mindy. Okay, our last one, we have Sense and Sensibility. So we have Colonel Brandon and Mr. Willoughby. Thoughts?
Wicked, wicked Willoughby.
Not a fan.
Really? Okay, why are you not a fan?
I don't know. He just irked me pretty much the whole time. I never really, again, I feel like sometimes you want to reread or rewatch and not have that feeling, but because I've just seen it so many times. But and then it was also a huge age gap with Colonel Brandon. So you're like, why would she want to be with the older guy? So like you start off with like, okay, she was going to be with the younger guy. She's not going to want to be. And then you like realize who Willoughby is. You're like, no, Colonel Brandon is so much better. But yeah, it's just his Willoughby's how he starts off like kind of you feel bad, like he really does like her, but he's already made so many mistakes that it just can't be. So it just turns you around.
I do think this one is unique though, because I do think Willoughby is the one that's the most in love with the key. Actually, I do think loved Marianne in his own way. Just his selfishness won out, and taking care of himself first before anything else he would rather do. And I mean, I guess you could, I just random thought, you could almost argue that it wasn't selfish, because if he would have stayed with Marianne and the news would have come out, then he would have ruined their whole family. So maybe it was an unselfish act to not stay with her. That could be a topic for another day that we could discuss. But I have such a hard time with Colonel Brandon, even though I love him to death. I just do not see the two of them being a good match, and it's really hard. And I'm sure the movie adaptations kind of influenced that, because I don't think anyone really does the perfect job at making them seem like a couple. Not that I'm not rooting for them, they just don't naturally feel like a couple. So it's a bit difficult in that sense. Mindy, what are your thoughts on the two of them?
Well, I know Marigold said she's about halfway through First Impressions. Melissa, have you started? I can't remember what you said.
Started.
Sorry. Yep. So towards the beginning, there's actually an excellent excerpt where in the past, where Jane is having a conversation with an elderly gentleman, Mr. Mansfield. He is kind of critiquing Sense and Sensibility for her as she's writing it. And he talks to her about Willoughby. And he says, I think you need to make him more of a sympathetic character, so that the audience, so that your reader doesn't see it telegraphed that he's going to be your bad boy. And, of course, this is all fictional, so we have no idea what inspired Jane Austen to build Willoughby the way she did. But I just think that's such an amazing idea, that we start out with him genuinely seeming to love Marianne, and then it almost feels like that twist, right? Like it's just a small-ish thing, but it's a huge twist, because it's almost like they're both heartbroken,
Yeah. And maybe she didn't want it to completely sit right with her readers. Maybe she wanted us to feel a bit unresolved of life isn't always perfect in the way things end up. It might be good, but not the perfect happy ending that we want it to be. So fascinating. I'm going to click off our slides here so I can see you all a bit more, but I think we'll save our discussion of 5 ways to keep yourself motivated to read through the new year for next week, because we went a little bit over on time, but that's okay, because we were having a lot of fun talking about the characters. And as always, it's so fun to just have a discussion about them and appreciate how we all see them in such different light. And rereading recently, rereading years ago, we're all in like a different timetable for when we've gone through the books, or when we watch the movies. And I love that fact about the community as a whole, and getting to hang out with other Austen fans, but like enjoying Austen in our own ways, that allow us to go back for the comfort reads or the comfort watches and those sort of things. I did want to remind everyone as well, this Saturday coming up at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we will be meeting with Greer McAllister, who is the author of Arctic Fury, which we read for last month's book club. If you haven't read the book, you are still more than welcome to come. Greer is going to be talking about her research that went into the book, her writing style, how she comes up with the ideas for her books. She has some really amazing books. I'm dying to get to her whole backlist because she has some really unique premises for the books that she writes that are spun off of stories, so historical fiction that is really, really intriguing. So you can join us for that. Just look for Jane Austen Literacy Foundation Community on Patreon and join as a friend of the foundation. And then the Zoom link will be coming. I will try to pin it to the top of the page so that everyone can find it for next time. So Mindy, thank you so much for joining us. Any last thoughts on Austen's Men?
Oh. No. Thanks for having me tonight.
Of course. And Marigold, any last thoughts?
No, they're all so unique and just fascinating characters. It's just a pleasure no matter which one you're watching or reading.
Absolutely. We'll be looking forward to hearing your thoughts on Persuasion as you keep making your way through that. And Mindy, Emma is what you're currently reading, and then First Impressions for all of us. So we'll be discussing that at the end of the month for our book club. So everyone have an amazing rest of your day, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is that you're catching this. And we will see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.